continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Center's program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SBDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno y lo dieron todo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras se aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona de adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children. And they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
Uno, dos, tres. A nuestros amigos intérpretes. Probando canal de inglés.
Testing 1, 2, 3. This is Nancy on the English channel. Testing 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay. Okay.
Español. Perfecto. Segunda cabina. Español. Español. Perfecto.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. English booth. Perfecto.
Muy amables.
To increase trade and investment in the region.
For us, the role of the OAS is very important, connecting countries, connecting governments and private sector, and letting us know what other countries are doing it and how we can replicate that in our countries to enhance development.
For me, who has come here to look at how can we develop our own ecosystem, our own innovation hubs, our own accelerators, I think seeing this, touching, feeling, seeing the transformation, seeing how quickly you've made it happen is a testament to what is possible. So I believe all of us leave here stronger than ever.
The Working Group of Experts on Subnational Competitiveness, the GTEX, is our gateway program to promote local economic competitiveness policies alongside municipal and state-level governments, together with the private sector and academia.
Este tipo de reuniones te sirven para darte cuenta de todo lo que se está viviendo en América Latina sobre los temas de competitividad. Y hoy justamente en este sector estamos viendo sobre todo los temas de innovación tecnológica, los que si hablamos de competitividad tenemos que hablar de tecnología. Y me está ayudando mucho para ver el panorama de ver lo que están haciendo otras ciudades y lo que podemos llegar a aplicar también nosotros en México.
The hub on the transfer and commercialization of technology is connecting and strengthening national innovation ecosystems in the region. Each edition of the hub trains budding technology entrepreneurs from the region's public and private sectors to take promising products and services from idea to market.
Porque es importante que estemos juntos en esto, porque la región tiene que estar unida y me parece que hay mucho conocimiento en la región que todavía no está explotado comercialmente como podría ser, y esta es la mejor manera de hacerlo.
Tenemos la proyección de cada año generar y compartir nuevas experiencias entre aquellos que contribuyen a la innovación. Queremos cambiar el cómo lo hemos estado haciendo en Latinoamérica. Queremos generar la unión de los países, queremos colaborar.
Our virtual platform on technology foresight, Prospecta Americas, will support OAS member states in identifying and mapping future trends and technological development of critical importance for the Americas.
Este esfuerzo, el cual viene siendo apoyado por la Organización de los Estados Americanos, nos permitirá tener una gran información para poder mapear estas iniciativas de innovación y poder que ellas contribuyan al crecimiento económico, a la competitividad y al bienestar de nuestras naciones.
Como bien sabemos, nos encontramos ya en la cuarta revolución industrial, la que está cambiando rápidamente la forma en que se hace negocios, se produce, se consume y se genera bienestar y entretenimiento en el mundo. Es la mayor amenaza, tal vez la mejor oportunidad que tenemos en nuestras naciones.
The Inter-American Teacher Education Network, the I-10, is working to improve the quality of teachers with an emphasis on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education. In 2019, the I-10 launched the first STEM Teacher Fellowship of the Americas. The Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas, ECPA, is working with governments in the Caribbean to advance electric mobility and clean transport as the sub-region pursues energy independence. Under our Integrated Water Resources Management Program, SETI is responding to the demand of member states for platforms and applications that enable data-driven policies. In the Central American region, for example, we are expanding the scope of Costa Rica's Plataforma Interactiva de Aplicación del Clima Tropical. This tool captures and disseminates real-time climate and water data, promoting resilient agriculture. The Inter-American Committee on Ports is building human and institutional capacity through public-private partnerships to address port modernization, logistics, and security. CooperaNet, SETI's multi-stakeholder platform for cooperation and partnerships, is being relaunched in 2019, responding to member states' call for a more robust hub for cooperation. In a region where 8 out of 10 consumers begin or end their shopping process online, SETI has entered into a partnership with the private sector
es una herramienta que sin duda acerca a las MIPYMES hacia la demanda que hoy está migrando a Internet, y con eso pretendemos mejorar las ventas y el posicionamiento de las empresas pequeñas.
As we look to the future, the Executive Secretariat for Integral Development will continue to leverage cooperation and partnerships to expand our reach, proving that together we are much more than the sum of our 34 member states.
Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se evocó creo con los de la OEA, y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno, y lo dieron todo lo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras se aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona de adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children. And they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to all member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 200
Muy buenos días.
Good morning. We are very pleased to welcome you to the Hall of the Americas to launch the high-level group for strengthening women's political participation. This is one of the first events being held in person at the OAS, but always observing health protocols, and that prevents us from offering you a coffee or some water. But we are very pleased to have you here and have you joining us on this very special occasion. This initiative, whose objective is to work hand in hand with some of the member states as in the implementation of the recommendations of the EOMs on women's political participation, is being fostered by DECO of the Secretariat for Strengthening Democracy of the General Secretariat of the OAS, with support from the Inter-American Commission of Women, the CIM. It is also being backed by the Government of Canada. To observe this very special occasion, we are joined by the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Luis Almagro, the former President of Costa Rica and the coordinator of the high-level group, Laura Chinchilla, Ambassador Hugh Adsett, the permanent representative of Canada to the OAS, Ambassador Rita Claverdi Diaz-Ciole, the permanent representative of Guatemala to the OAS, and Ambassador Josué Fiallo, the permanent representative of the Dominican Republic to the OAS, and the executive secretary of the CIM, Alejandra Mora Mora. We are also pleased to have among our attendees the Director of Hemispheric Affairs for Canada, Emily McLaughlin, representatives of the member states and observer states, authorities from the General Secretariat, and staff of the organization. To all of you joining us and all of you following the broadcast, thank you for joining us. To begin, I would like to invite the Secretary General, Luis Almagro, to provide us with some opening remarks. It is an honor to have you here with us, Madam President. This year, the Organization of American States is commemorating 60 years of observing electoral processes in the region. The OAS has made significant efforts to professionalize the work of international electoral observation and to position the EOMs as key instruments for strengthening democracy in our region. Among the steps that have been most important in this professionalization is the adoption of a methodology for incorporating a gender perspective into the missions. Since 2011, this has allowed us to rigorously observe two obstacles women face in terms of full political participation. The region has advanced in methods to increase women's participation in elections at the legislative and national levels where there's an impact on electoral reforms. The number of women in office has climbed. It has doubled in the region between 1990 and 2018 from 9% to 28.6%. Though, as you see, that percentage is still not enough. The policies in the Americas have experienced an opening to women at the senior levels. From data from the Interparliamentary Union, Latin America is the region in the world with the most women legislators. Despite this, there are still major inequalities for women's participation in many countries in the region. The OAS is committed to fight for the equal political rights for all women in the hemisphere. We have taken a position to guarantee and ensure that this objective is met for all women, from the implementation of the methodology to incorporate the gender perspective into the EOMs. The OAS began to work within the Secretariat for Strengthening Democracy with 27 missions. Through this methodology, the missions have been able to examine systematically factors that either directly or indirectly have an impact on opportunities and obstacles for women to participate equally in electoral processes. In addition, in the implementation of the instrument, all missions have a women expert on women's participation. Last year, those deployed by the OAS to observe elections, 50% were women, 50% were men. Thanks to these efforts, the EOMs have reviewed recommendations for strengthening women's political participation, among those the adoption of affirmative actions such as quotas, pushing for parity, and measures to prevent, punish, and eradicate political violence perpetrated against women. What is more, the recommendations have looked at promoting policies that ensure equality and non-discrimination in elections through different training processes at different levels. There are different recommendations that are aimed at ensuring that political parties adopt mechanisms to recruit and retain women so that they can stand for election, as well as the presentation, as well as their candidacies for the most senior elected office. There have also been efforts to provide public funding to women candidates, and these efforts come from institutions in charge of elections. These recommendations are all aimed at ensuring greater participatory and representative democracy. Women have helped to shed light on the historic discrimination that women have faced in exercising political right and inclusion in positions of power. In the Department of Electoral Cooperation, DECO, and the support from the Inter-American Commission of Women, we want to make additional efforts to raise the profile and some of the recommendations on women's political participation, as well as exploring mechanisms and promoting initiatives that will enable tighter cooperation with countries as they move forward in implementing the recommendations. With this objective in mind, the high-level group for strengthening women's political participation has been created. It is made up by very well-known leaders in the region. Today, at the head of the group, and we're very grateful for the trust and participation in this great initiative, we have Laura Chinchilla, the former president of Costa Rica. This group will also be comprised of Alvarado, Maria Angela, Ana Tamant, Rosina Winchell, Gabriela Cuevas, among others. We also want to extend our greetings and thanks to each and every one of you. All members of the group have held leadership roles in their countries of origin. Their experiences are important in promoting equality and non-discrimination in the political and cultural realms, and to put an end to stereotypes that have plagued politics and that have made their full participation difficult, as well as eradicating violence against women. These are ongoing efforts. I hope that the story of these women will be replicated throughout the Americas. We're implementing the recommendations of the EOMs and to work toward full participation for women in politics. So the high-level group will meet with key stakeholders, EOMs, as well as with civil society and academia. We would like to extend our thanks to Guatemala and the Dominican Republic, here by Ambassador Rita Claverdi and Josue Fiallo, for their ongoing commitment to this effort and to ensure that this high-level group will disseminate the recommendations. We would like to thank all countries for their determination and their openness to being a part of this effort. I also wanted to extend my thanks to Alejandra Mora, the Executive Secretary of the SIM, for your collaboration and cooperation with this group to mainstream this fifth pillar of incorporating a gender approach into the organization. Alejandra has been a tireless fighter We would also like to thank the permanent representative of Canada for Canada's ongoing commitment and support for tackling this very serious challenge in the Americas. Canada has been firmly committed to democracy and to women's participation and rights. Democracy, and with Secretary Francisco Guerrero, with Gerardo, and with each and every one of you, we must continue to work to strengthen women's participation. Thank you to each and every one of you. Much remains to be done, but you could not be in better hands. Thank you very much, Secretary General. The Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission of Women, the CIM, Alejandra Mora Mora, now has the floor. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Mr. Secretary General. Thank you very much. Thank you for that introduction to this event on EOMs and this discussion of what's happening with women's political rights. Madam Ex-President Laura Chinchilla, as well as to you, ambassadors and secretaries, all of those at the head table. You are in co-fighters. We have Paco Guerrero, Ricardo Casas, we have Secretary Lambert, as well as all of you joining us today. I wanted to begin by sharing my sincere thanks for the invitation of being part of this. It's so important to this collective work under the Secretariat to strengthen democracy and the role that DECO plays. We fully support this very powerful initiative and this need to push the agenda forward in the region, and what is necessary for that is collective effort. Furthermore, we have to acknowledge the transformative vocation of EOMs in terms of shedding light on what happens with women, recognizing the differences, and to push forward strategic actions that can maybe push the envelope in terms of women's ability to participate, where there are recommendations in terms of equality, education, financing, violence, and of course parity, which is becoming a new political ethic in the region that the organization has taken on as a substantial part of its technical and external work. We are very pleased to be able to contribute with women's voices, women's experiences, with the differentiated experiences. We want to commend Guatemala and the Dominican Republic for spearheading this process, for wanting to innovate and drive this agenda, and to these great incredible women. I can't describe them in any other way, but who are here, part of this panel, as well as those spearheading this, which of course I am very pleased to say as a fellow Costa Rican. The CIM believes that women's participation is an essential part of democracies that are representative. We have talked about incomplete or unfinished democracies when there is not enough representation for women. The CIM owes its creation to the fights in the 1920s and the 1930s in this region. The fight for women's right to vote. This is the context in which the CIM was born and has always had at the core of its agenda women's participation. One of the first conventions from 1948 was on women's political rights, and this was the brainchild of the SIM. Now, much has happened since that time. Since then, matters of citizenship, suffrage, rights for representation have been a part of many forums. Quotas were the first step that transformed the visible face of legislatures in the region. And there was in 2021, we had the 20th anniversary of the first quotas law. Women have been able to penetrate decision-making levels. And we have a new concept that we believe it's very important to position, which is this matter of parity. Parity is not affirmative action. It's distribution through justice. As women are half the population, then they should represent half of the decision makers. Parity also brings us to two powerful concepts being put forward by this organization. That is the ability to reach positions of power free of violence, with the ability to discharge their functions. This is a part of a powerful women's agenda that is being built regionally. This is part of a collective and regional push towards women's rights and the respect therefore. Nevertheless, all of these events, all of these efforts, despite them, we're still seeing many deficits. Right now, just 2 women are holding the position of either president or prime minister in the region. This is because gender-based barriers persist. And the glass ceiling, as well as sticky floors, as well as labyrinths. The situation of women who devote so much of their time to caregiving, and of course, this is one of the strategic barriers that prevents women's full participation in political life. Furthermore, there are gender stereotypes, and this was something indicated by the Secretary General, and major disparities in terms of access to funding. What's more, there are patriarchal practices and conducts in politics. These are strategic actors, and these are the vehicles to democracy to reach the highest positions of decision-making, and there's still a lot of work we need to do there. Resistance persists. The more power women gain, the more resistance we see. And that's why we see political violence. And the EOMs have tried very hard to shed light on this situation. It's a deficit, it's a challenge, and it requires deep understanding as part of a regional instrument that was approved by the OAS, in other words, the Convention of Belém do Pará, to prevent, punish, and eradicate violence against women. We know that EOMs have watched the evolution of women's rights. They've pushed this powerful agenda through the recommendations they've put forward, and today we will start to transform women's lives in the countries of the Americas as part of the work of this organization, so that they understand, so that they can have comprehensive representation, and so that decisions are increasingly incorporating a women's perspective. Thank you to the OAS, to the Secretary General, to the DECO, to everyone who has put efforts together to push this effort forward and place it at the top of the region's agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Secretary Mora. To conclude this first part, this opening part, let us listen now to Ambassador Hugh Atzett, Permanent Representative of Canada to the OAS. Thank you very much. It is truly a pleasure to be here with you, Your Excellency Laura Chinchilla, ex-president of the Republic of Costa Rica, Luis Almagro, Secretary General of the OAS, Alejandra Mora Mora, Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission of Women, Permanent Representative of the Dominican Republic to the OAS, Ambassador Fiallo, Permanent Representative of Guatemala to the OAS, Ambassador Rita Claveri Diaz de Scioli, and distinguished permanent representatives, dear guests.
Gerardo et collègues de DECO, le Canada est heureux de participer au lancement du tout premier groupe de haut niveau visant la mise en œuvre des recommandations de l'OAS sur la participation politique des femmes dans les Amériques. We're pleased today to be able to attend this launch of the first high-level working group on the implementation of the recommendations of Electoral Observation Missions, or EOMs, I'll use that a couple of times in English, on women's political participation in the Americas. This morning, I just wanted to say a couple of words. First, let me start. The Department of Electoral Cooperation and Observation, as I think all of you know, but I think it never fails, or it's important for us to always remember, plays a critical role in upholding and strengthening democratic governance in the region, reinforcing the ability of electoral management bodies to administer electoral processes, and building upon EOM, Election Observation Mission, recommendations. DECO is uniquely positioned. It's uniquely positioned to support and to improve countries' full electoral cycles because it has two roles that it plays. One is to conduct electoral observation missions, and I think that's the one that we hear of often, but the other is also to follow up on the recommendations that are coming out of those missions. Our partnership, Canada's partnership with DECO, through the Project Electoral Support Program in Latin America and the Caribbean, supports the strengthening of institutions, the safeguarding of democratic principles, and the promotion of respect for human rights, including the rights of women and girls and people in situations of vulnerability. Part of this project is the high-level working group, and the high-level working group itself also has a very important role to play. It's an innovative approach that responds to critical needs. And as the Secretary General had said, it does so by creating visibility and momentum on the need to take action to implement EOM recommendations on the importance of women's political participation. I think the turnout today indicates that there's a strong and necessary interest in this issue. We know that in the region, Latin American and Caribbean region, there are signs of progress in women's political leadership, which I think raises hopes that the glass ceiling, techos de cristal, can soon be overcome. But we need to do things to make that a reality. And one of those is to create opportunities and the right conditions for women to succeed and to maintain the momentum that has been created across the region. Why? Well, I think it's perhaps obvious, but I'm going to repeat it here anyway, because women's full participation in leadership and decision-making are fundamental elements of democratic societies that are inclusive and sustainable. When women and girls have a voice in political decision-making, policies and programs can be better designed to address the needs of all people. Women's leadership can help break down the barriers that prevent women and girls from succeeding and can help create more equal societies. Canada supports initiatives to strengthen women's influence and capacity to take part in public life and decision-making, including in elections, in democratic institutions, and in the public sector. So to you, inspirational women's leaders, we're very grateful. We're grateful for your participation in this high-level working group. Your mandate is not an easy one, but we know that you have the leadership to do so and to bring to light the importance of implementing recommendations on women's political participation at the table. Let me take this opportunity also to thank Laura Chinchilla, ex-presidenta de la República de Costa Rica, as well as all of the other participants that have agreed to join this high-level group. Your leadership and engagement is an important and fundamental part of this regional effort. Without saying more, I'm very much looking forward to hearing about the expected work from this distinguished group. Thank you. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. It is now an honor to introduce the coordinator of the high-level group. She was president of Costa Rica from 2010 to 2014. She was the first woman in the country to be elected to that position. As part of her political career, she was a representative in the Legislative Assembly, Vice President of the Republic, and Minister of Justice. At present, she is Vice President of the Club de Madrid, Co-President of the Inter-American Dialogue, member of the International Olympic Committee, and of advisory and directive councils of a number of foundations and institutions. In addition, she has been head of MOEs, or rather electoral missions, in 2015 in Mexico, 2016 in the United States, and 2018 in Paraguay and Brazil. We would like to invite her to take the floor. Madam former President of Costa Rica, Laura Chinchilla. Thank you very much, and good morning. Dear Secretary General Luis Almagro, ambassadors to the U.S., thank you, Ambassador from Canada, for being so consistent and the commitment that your government has expressed for democracy and human rights. Also to the ambassadors from Guatemala and the Dominican Republic, to the U.S. for daring to be the first to receive this group that will be working in a coordinated fashion with your governments, your electoral authorities in implementing some of their recommendations. Thank you for this, and thank you for ratifying your commitment to equity of women in the area of political rights. Madam Alejandra Mora, thank you very much, my dear friend, for being with us in this important initiative. And I would also like to express my deep appreciation to those who have opened the doors to this important activity that will allow strengthening our election processes. Mr. Francisco Guerrero and the director of DECO, Gerardo de Casa, as well as their teams, some of whom are present here today. Ambassadors, representatives, dear friends, thank you all for providing this honor of participating in this extraordinary group of women in the region, whom I would like to greet: Maria Angela, Isabel, Gabriela, Adriana, Albuciana, and Rocio. Thank you very much for this initiative. It is an initiative that is fair and visionary, an initiative that is fair precisely on behalf of human rights, on behalf of equity, of 50% of our region's population, but which in addition, and precisely at this point, is truly trying to ensure that efforts are redoubled to reaffirm their rights. Historically, we have a debt towards women. If we analyze the more relevant indicators, we can see that there's still a delay in spite of the progress that has been made in the area of employment, underemployment, of labor informality, of relative salary, the disproportionate labor, non-remunerated, unpaid labor, and especially, and of course, problems of violence, that is, of gender violence. These are some of these invoices that we still have to adjust given progress that has been made in the rights of women. This debt has become even greater, which is why this initiative is arriving at a time when it helps to launch a message of hope for women of our region. It is a debt that increased because of the pandemic, because as we have already seen on other occasions, there ends up being almost an inevitable feminization of crises. This crisis, which is still with us, and of course its impact will last for a long time, has simply expanded the gender gaps according to the World Economic Forum, which in 2021 stated that to close this gender gap will require, instead of 99 years, 140 years. In addition, ECLA believes that in the case of our countries, the pandemic has led to going back almost 10 years in the area of gender equality, which is why we are now compelled to respond. And the best way to respond to these claims by women, the best way to act, given this pending debt and given these gaps that have expanded, is to promote even further and more consistently the access of women to their political rights by promoting their, giving them more power, more decision-making positions, which will also lead to women with more and more effective access to their rights. Now, in order to speed up this progress, we can't always or only claim for the rights. I know that we are all convinced of this need. The political goodwill that has been there, as we have seen in agreements and laws and institutions that we have created throughout the region, are not enough. What we need is more clear, more methodical work, more systematic, and that is why there is a difference that is being made by this initiative. This initiative is making a difference because it makes us think that in spite of all these efforts that the Secretary General acknowledged that have occurred in the region, to the point that it is one of the regions where we have made more progress in the area of political rights for women, still this is not being necessarily reflected in the dimensions that should be seen as far as access to power. To this day, the average percentage of participation of women in ministerial cabinets is of about 28%, or 32%, which is the percentage of women who are in the highest courts of justice. That's the average in the region. 33 or almost 34%, that's the average of seats occupied by women in parliaments. And only 3 out of 5 countries now are 50-50. And only 15% is the percentage of women who occupy positions, electoral positions in local governments. So as you can see, we still have a lot to do. And as I was saying, goodwill is not enough. Enthusiasm is not enough. The decision and firmness with which we express is not enough, because we need a method to truly make a difference in the effort, and that is what DECO and the OAS and its political secretariat are doing. I have to acknowledge, because I can prove that electoral observation missions of the OAS have been and are still an invaluable tool in our region. They guarantee an impartial and technical perspective of or on and about political processes, and they admit recommendations which, yes, may be based on global and general principles to defend women and promoting women. At the same time, they also are very wisely adapting themselves to domestic contexts, to national contexts. Women have given us very precise diagnoses on institutional and cultural regulations that define women's participation in the political area of our countries. And what we want is precisely to extract that information, to systematize it, and to follow up on the recommendations that have been issued. There are data that, as a matter of fact, were briefly mentioned by the Secretary General that seem to suggest what steps need to be taken from here on in order to effectively implement these recommendations. For instance, in general, about 40% of the recommendations issued up to now in the reports in the last 10 years, which is the raw material with which we will work, that is what has happened in the last 10 years, emphasize that about 40% of the recommendations have insisted on the need to promote greater equity in women's representation in popular election positions, be it through the better adoption of or implementation of quotas, or in those cases in which progress has been made in the area of quotas, through parity. In many cases, that rule is there, but it's not been implemented. And I can say that because I am a personal witness of how political parties maneuver, change, or rather maneuver legislation in favor of the interests of those who are still blocking the access of women to these public positions. That interpretation, that jurisprudence by electoral courts, by constitutional courts, or by regular judicial courts are essential to ensure the true and effective implementation of these instruments that have to do with quotas and parity. Another aspect which has also been mentioned by SIM's secretary is the growing concern as women have more access to political positions on political violence. Only in 2018 and 2021 do we have the different reports submitted by DECO, and only then did they start insisting on these type of measures. From about 7% in 2018, that was increased to 30% in 2021, which reflects then the fact that the problem is increasingly greater, but also the awareness of the electoral missions on this subject. Also, many of the recommendations have emphasized the need of improving training and education aimed at female leaders and electoral officials, to civil society, to mass media, etc. And I would like to say that this is not just a small action. This is not something that we have to minimize. It's rather one of the most important and relevant actions that we need to promote. In the Human Development Report of the UN, that is the 2019 UN report on inequalities in the world, I was part of the advisory council, by the way, we expressed our concern about a trend that is increasing, which is this wave that is going against women's rights, connected to what we are seeing now with regard to increasing access to spheres of power. This has been accompanied by deterioration in the perception levels and deterioration in human or social standards, which means that only 10%, or 14 and then 10% of women show that there's no bias regarding women's participation in social life. Of course, we all here face the challenge of social networks and of this world that is trying to stop progress in the area of human rights. We should also mention the subject of access to political financing and the subject or subjects that have to do with being able to produce the necessary information duly differentiated with a gender perspective, which is the only way in which we can truly measure progress that we are generating. And I would like to, in this first part, I would like to say that we also should aspire, and since there is an effort launched here with the presence of the Secretary of the Inter-American Women's Commission, we see that we have to go a bit beyond what is strictly electoral and be able to convey a message by Alejandra's team on the other obstacles that are preventing the full incorporation of women in political activities, such as the fact that we have the model law of care in the Americas, which needs to be promoted in order to level the field for women too. This is not only a fair initiative, it is also a visionary initiative. It is an initiative which is arriving not only at a critical point for women in our region, but also at a time when we are going through a kind of silent pandemic, i.e. the pandemic against democracy. This is at a global level, but also in the Americas. There are few regions in the world that have so much embraced democracy during the third wave of democratization. Few regions in only 20 years, like Latin America did. All the countries in the region, except for one, reached a status of democracy thanks to a number of reforms that were made. During that same period, at a regional level, the Inter-American Democratic Chapter was adopted, which just last year commemorated 20 years. It's a fundamental and essential instrument for the joint defense of democracy in our hemisphere. Latin America has never been as democratic as it was in the middle of the first decade of this century. But unfortunately, the progress that has been made is reversing, and now that is evident. The Democracy Index of The Economist for Latin America and the Caribbean indicates that it has been a region in which there's been the greatest deterioration during the last few years. The report also shows that in a relatively short time, much shorter than these 20 years that it took to reach the maximum level of democracy in the region, we lost practically 4 democracies, 2 that are considered hybrid regimes and 2 that are autocracies. Kerhouse underlines the tendency towards a deterioration of civil rights, such as the freedom of expression, deterioration of pluralism, and of rule of law. And finally, Latin Barometro reminds us that amongst the citizens in our region, the support for democracy vis-a-vis authoritarian alternatives has decreased by almost 13% in only 8 years. So that, my dear friends, on the basis of these indicators, we can assert that even though we don't wake up every day in our region with more autocracies, we do wake up with democracies of a lower quality. So going beyond the battles that are fought starting here at the OAS, beyond going the leadership by the Secretary General who defends democratic values, beyond the commitment by ambassadors that are here with us today, the fact is that more than that, we need to deploy even more efforts, more steps that will allow us to put an end to this gradual deterioration, which is also fast, that we see in our democracies. Unfortunately, I repeat, unfortunately, one thing that we can see is that part of this trend has also to do with a deterioration in the quality of regional leadership. We are seeing once again the caudillo type system that had been left behind, we thought, but they are now promoting a number of actions that go against democracy. Positions that divide, that polarize, positions that show that politics is not necessarily a space for open and democratic political debate, but rather they become a platform to promote anti-democratic feelings and populism. In the midst of these deteriorations, however, we still have some elements that are encouraging. All indicators agree that Latin America is increasingly seeing a greater claim by many sectors for democratic participation. And as a matter of fact, we have seen, maybe not always as we would like to see, but we still see that people have expressed themselves, and they have expressed themselves by showing that they wish to be more active, that they wish others to understand that there are effective political rights and the possibility to participate between elections. And we're not only talking here about that wish that comes from the younger people in our region, but we're also seeing that coming from women in Latin America and the Caribbean, which is why when I say that it is a visionary initiative, I say that because I see there that there is a possibility of increasing these spaces of democratic participation, the possibility of attracting female leadership, not only in those trenches where we've always seen that women participate, because I would like to say that in some of the missions we have been able to see that up to 70% of women are the ones who are there looking out for the purity of vote, looking out for opening the ballot boxes and closing electoral centers. They're there in person, looking out for the integrity of the political process. But we must take these women who have been in the trenches, we should bring them to the positions where they can be the masters of the fate of their countries. I'm convinced that many of the challenges that are faced now by our democracies and that are connected to a deterioration in the quality of leadership will be clearly counteracted by a greater leadership of women and a greater participation of women in politics. Today, women, we understand that the deterioration of democracy presupposes automatically a deterioration in the rights of women. And that has been proven by a number of international scenarios. The deterioration of democracy and of human rights presupposes the triumph of a discourse that is often discriminatory and misogynistic, which is why I'm also convinced of the fact that the women in the region not only demand this initiative as a way of paying historical debts, as I said at the beginning, but also as a way to giving them more instruments to defend and promote our democracy when the democracy most needs them. That initiative, thus, Mr. Secretary General, Ambassadors, is not only great news for women in our region, but it is also great news for our democracies. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Madam President. We would like to reiterate our deep gratitude for you for spearheading this effort. Now we will be showing a video that we put together for this occasion where the members of the high-level group explain some of the challenges and what they've come across in their work as part of this group. High-level group for the strengthening of women's political participation. Politics has historically been a hostile environment for women.
The men, their private lives are considered public sphere. Los obstáculos que encontramos las mujeres.
The obstacles that women are up against to exercise our political rights are many. Some begin at the very most basic level, that is being women. Difficulties in even being able to vote. Obtaining the right to vote was not an easy path. And even educating women about this right has not been easy. There have been different phases throughout history as we've tried to create equity.
Com zero gastos de campanha, a demonstrar.
We have seen hostility in political environments targeting women.
En la mayoría de los congresos.
In most Latin American countries, we need to see a great deal more women participating and being in decision-making spaces, in putting together policies. Where there are no affirmative action laws in place that create conditions whereby women can access the political realm through quotas or parity, it is very difficult for women. We don't feel like we're competitors. We are colleagues. We always want to do our work together. Women have to be in positions of power, positions in legislatures, in the executive, at the municipal, state, and federal level, and they have to hold positions in the judiciary. Women's participation in political and power spaces is important. Better decisions will be made because they will be broader, they will have a more comprehensive vision underpinning them. For democracy and building robust democracies, you have to have all stakeholders involved, and this includes women. Breaking through glass ceilings will ensure that our aspirations can move forward. We have the ability to govern, to hold any office. A democracy without women is not a democracy. about representation. This is about inclusion. This is about participation. These are all the values that underpin and help to strengthen democracy. Participation. Without it is possible to have women in elected office as mayors, as representatives, as presidents.
Change is if you are prepared to step forward.
Estar convencidas que podemos llegar.
We have to work to convince people that women can do anything we aspire to do. Governments have to pave the way to create the conditions, not just for women as candidates for office, but conditions whereby young girls, girls living in rural areas, Indigenous women have access to political life. Change will only happen as we overhaul our institutions. This is a very important topic in the region. We have to work on it. We have to do this in forums like the Organization of American States. The final report by the OAS put forth a very important recommendation that has to be embraced in Brazil. It was the creation of a gender unit for electoral justice. This means that the Brazilian justice system would help to better foster women's participation.
The greater participation of women in leadership.
En la medida en que podamos.
To the degree by which we can close these gaps from the very beginning at the earliest ages, it will be easier to have societies that openly accept women's participation. Looking at the recommendations coming out of the EOMs, it is going to be very important to implement them as we move forward. Guatemala and the Dominican Republic have been the first two countries to volunteer and express interest in being part of this initiative. We are very pleased to now invite Ambassador Rita Clavierde Diaz de Ciole, Permanent Representative of Guatemala, to the OAS. Your Excellency, Laura Chinchilla, former President of Costa Rica, it is truly a pleasure to see you after a number of years, let's not say how many. Mr. Secretary General of the OAS, Luis Almagro, Ambassador Hugh Adsett, Permanent Representative of Canada, Ambassador Josue Fiallo, Permanent Representative of the Dominican Republic, Madam Executive Secretary of the SIM, Alejandra Mora Mora, permanent representatives and alternate representatives and permanent observers to the OAS. Good morning. I also see Secretary Plata with us, Secretary Lambert, and of course, Secretary Guerrero, and Ignacia, the director of DECO. It is my honor to be participating on behalf of the Guatemalan government on this project to give visibility to an implementation of recommendations of the OMs as they relate to women's political participation, which is done thanks to Canada's generous cooperation, which reiterates through this project, as we heard today, the unwavering commitment of Canada to democracy in the hemisphere and women's participation. I would also like to express my thanks to the Department of DECO, the Secretariat for Strengthening Democracy of the General Secretariat, for considering Guatemala among the first countries to be part of this very significant project, whose aim is to boost opportunities and capacity for women to participate in politics. The truth is, Madam President, your participation has been truly inspiring. This video that we just saw, and I commend you for it, it's such an excellent presentation of this entire high-level group who will be involved in this project. This project is just one of many efforts by the OAS to promote women's participation. These are efforts that Guatemala has supported on a number of occasions. I recall specifically the resolution adopted in 2020, representation and women's participation and representation at the OAS. Here we recognize the full support of the Secretary General for women's involvement in the agenda and follow-up of the recommendations formulated by the OAS's EOMs, as well as women's participation in these electoral observation missions. I also wanted to thank Alejandra Mora and the SIM for their publications having to do with women's political participation, where we see mention of violence directed at women who participate in politics in Latin America, protection standards for women's human rights, and necessary tools to champion their political participation, as well as political parties and prevent, punish, and eradicate violence against women in politics, among others. As a woman, I feel very fortunate to be part of today's event, wherein we are launching this high-level group that is comprised of very prominent women in the region. The idea is to join efforts with national authorities, political stakeholders, and social actors. Guatemala's participation in this project is particularly important because historically, Guatemalan women have had very limited access to positions of power in the executive and legislative branches. Currently, Guatemala is 121st of 188 countries in the global ranking of number of women legislators. And in 2019, our Congress had 19.3% women legislators, which is below the regional average. Along these lines, it's important to note that the current Speaker of the Congress is a woman this year. In this context, the recommendations from the EOMs, particularly those from 2011, 2015, 2019, emphasize the undeniable need to promote women's political participation and the need for them to be involved in decision-making to ensure better development. It's also important to note that among the efforts being undertaken by the country to promote women's political participation, the Department to promote women's political participation from our judiciary is undertaking consultation processes and providing briefings and trainings to help build women's capacity at a civic level. The court is seeking to implement actions and activities to promote women's electoral, civic, and political participation on an equal footing as men. It also fosters awareness-raising processes to reflect on women's inclusion and challenges they face as we try to create an inclusive democracy in Guatemala. And finally, this department is seeking to improve the electoral and democratic system in the country by promoting women's participation in civic, political, and electoral environments. In Guatemala, there's a great opportunity to continue to move forward in respecting women's political rights, strengthening democracy, and strengthening national development through these efforts. Undoubtedly, this project will help to bring positive results through the support of the high-level group and our local electoral authorities and representatives of civil society who are interested in this opportunity. I would like to thank you once again for the opportunity extended to my country. You can count on Guatemala's full support to implement this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. And it is now a pleasure to give the floor to Ambassador Josue Fiallo, Permanent Representative of the Dominican Republic to the OAS. Thank you very much and good morning. Distinguished Secretary General Luis Almagro, distinguished Doña Laura Chinchilla, former President of Costa Rica, Madam Alejandra Mora Mora, Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission of Women, Ambassador Hugh Atzett, Permanent Representative of Canada to the OAS, and Ambassador Claverie Diaz, Permanent Representative of Guatemala. Dear colleagues, dear officials, especially Secretary James Landon, Francisco Guerrero, dear friends. First of all, and on behalf of the government of the Dominican Republic, we would like to thank you for launching this high-level group for strengthening political participation of women in the Dominican Republic too, which is part of the working plan of the project to implement the recommendations of the EOMs of the OAS regarding women's political participation to be implemented by the Department of DECO, and that is part of the Secretariat for the Strengthening of Democracy in this organization. The high-level group is made up by high-level women of the region, and it wants to make more visible and implement the EOM's recommendations on women's political participation as key actors and stakeholders in our region, part of the executive, legislative, and electoral branches, as well as the Dominican civil society. Likewise, it would like to submit substantive and substantial administrative and legal proposals to strengthen women's participation in the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic does have a long history of cooperation in the area of elections. The first EOM in the Dominican Republic was in 1962, which together with Costa Rica were the first two countries that received electoral observation missions. As a matter of fact, in total, in the OAS, there have been 18 missions of electoral observation in our countries. The last one was in 2020 to observe our special presidential and senator as well as representative elections, which were held on July 5th, 2020. That EOM was carried out in a very complex situation, all of this due to the context of the COVID pandemic. And in its last report submitted by the EOM, the adoption of a quota similar to parity was acknowledged as progress, a ceiling of 60% of candidacies in plurinational elections, as was seen in 2018-2010. When we analyze the percentages of candidacies to election positions on July the 5th in 2020, by gender, even though it is true that at a vice presidential level, the candidacy of women were 50%, still, and at the level of representatives or deputies, about 44%. At the level of Senate, it was only of 12.5%, which is a great challenge, which political parties and our society are still facing. And we are sure that the work of this high-level group will contribute to take the conversation in the right direction, which will eventually lead us to a situation or to an ideal situation of participation. In the last election in 2020, the EOM made a number of recommendations to our country regarding women's political participation. Among them, to renew the commitment of the Dominican Republic with the Belém do Pará Convention to discuss the adoption of a new law against political violence against women, and to strengthen training programs with a gender perspective, both for institutional stakeholders as well as for political organizations, to promote strict compliance with the legislation that seeks for equal participation of women, and to have a number of financial resources given by political parties aimed exclusively to the promotion of leadership and candidacy of women, among other recommendations. The timetable for this high-level group, with the support of the Inter-American Commission of Women, envisages two visits to our country. The first one should be held between May 9 and 11th of this year, which will be headed by Her Excellency Laura Chinchilla, as well as Isabel San Malo de Alvarado, former Vice President and Foreign Secretary of the Republic of Panama. As you can see, challenges imply an interinstitutional focus which involves our country, the legislative branch, supervisory institutions, and civil society organizations. We hope that this high-level group will be successful in all of its work aimed at strengthening democracy and the political participation of women in political processes in the Dominican Republic. Before concluding, I would like to avail myself of this opportunity so that on behalf of the government and people of the Dominican Republic, reiterate our thanks to the government of Canada and to the Department for Cooperation for Electoral Observation, DECO, because of its support in the area of electoral observation in our country during the last decades, which has contributed to strengthening our democracy, since our country has a climate of peace, social stability, as well as political and economic stability to the benefit of our citizens in our region. Thank you very much. With these last few words, thank you, Ambassador. We conclude our event. We would like to thank our special guests, our speakers, and everybody who has been here with us in the Salón de las Américas, as well as everyone who has followed this in live transmission. Thank you very much.